Hello, everyone, and welcome to this interview with Rebecca Long Bailey about the budget that Jeremy Hunt gave this week. My name's Matthew. I'm from Arise Festival and the Labour Outlook website. Thank you for joining us, Becky.
No,
Um,
thanks for having me.
what do you think the budget means for the people out there who've been struggling so much in this cost of living emergency?
Well, the budget was critical in that it should have done two things this week. It should have insulated people from the cost of living crisis and tackled poverty pay in the process. And it should have also invested in a real industrial strategy to reverse the decline in living standards that we've seen over the last 13 years, and neither happened. And what makes it even worse is that the budget was delivered on a day when so many of Britain's key workers were forced to strike over poverty pay. And there was no mention at all about them in the budget, about what the government was going to do. But at the same time as all of that, of course, the Chancellor found a lot of money to hand out to large corporations. So the money was there, it just wasn't for our key workers. So it was quite a depressing budget. And when you get into the detail, as I said, there was nothing at all really in terms of industrial strategy. There was a mention of it, but not really any funding or any real strategy at all. And indeed, when the Chancellor spoke about trying to get people back to work, there was no mention of the issue of poverty pay, which holds so many people back. There was no mention of funding our NHS properly, really, because a lot of people are off work who are sick and struggling, and they're not receiving the care and support that they need. And they needed that support through the NHS, as well as support in getting back to work. And that didn't happen. And then there was also no mention of how taxation was going to be made more fairer in this country. So, for example, one thing that the Chancellor could have done was to tax oil and gas companies more robustly. They've been raking in billions only in the last few months alone. And there was no mention of that at all. And that money could have been used to help people with their energy bills instead of just having a price cap for 3 months and no promise that bills would come down, even though wholesale energy prices are dropping. And there was also no mention of the introduction of a wealth tax. And now would be a critical time to do that in order to give our funding, public services, the funding boost that they really need. And even organisations who aren't traditionally seen as being even vaguely to the centre left or left of this country, like Patriotic Millionaires UK, they were lobbying government asking for a wealth tax, and they set out a plan whereby a wealth tax on the super rich would have brought in at least £50 billion a year that could have been spent on our public services. So there were choices that the Chancellor could have made to protect people and provide people with the life that they deserve, and he didn't do that at the budget, sadly.
You mentioned energy prices and how that's contributing poverty. It seems a bit like obviously something being extended for 3 months will help a lot of people compared with nothing at all. But it feels like people are permanently worried about it, like it's just one cliff edge after the other. It's no sort of stable solution to fuel poverty.
Exactly, and that's the problem. So the first thing is that the energy price cap was frozen for another 3 months at £2,500, but that's still up 19% in real terms on what people were paying originally. And as I said, there's no mention at all. If you'd have said that and then at the same time and said, well, look, we're going to cap it for 3 months, but then I can guarantee bills are going to come down because we've seen that wholesale energy prices are falling. Therefore, there's no excuse not to bring it down in the future. Then that could have provided some hope for people. But he's not going to do that because our energy market's broken, because we've seen rampant profiteering over the last 40 years from various sectors of the energy market. And I think as listeners will probably always know, I think that the real solution to all of this is to bring large parts of our energy network into public ownership so that we have more control to bring bills down and keep costs as low as possible, but also to invest in the critical infrastructure that we need for the future, especially when we're looking at trying to drive up investment in renewable technologies and renewable energies.
The other sort of big political issue, I suppose, at the moment, for context, is the government's drive of anti-refugee rhetoric and legislation. And alongside this, maybe doesn't get as much coverage as things like the public order, so-called public order bill,
Yeah.
and so on. Do you feel like these attacks on other communities and also these kind of restrictions on trade unions and other bodies' right to protest, that this is connected to the Tories' kind of economic agenda?
Yeah, I mean, I'll deal with the two issues separately. So firstly, on the the illegal migration bill that the government brought in this week, it was inhumane. It's almost certainly in breach of the UN Refugee Convention and human rights law. But what worries me about this, aside from the fact that it will actually put more lives at risk, is the inflammatory language and the toxic debate that has been surrounding this in recent weeks. And the government, unfortunately, has been at the heart of that with the language that they've been using, and they're putting asylum seekers and refugees and those who are working with them at risk. Now, it is right to say that we do need to have a reasoned debate about our asylum system because it is broken. We've got a situation at the moment where people who, they're fleeing horrific places of war in fear of their lives. And even if they do make it here safely, and many of them don't because most of the safe routes have actually been closed down, which is why people are resorting to putting their lives at risk in inflatable dinghies. But even if they do get here, sometimes they're waiting years for a decision from the Home Office. And that's years where you can't put down roots, you can't work. If you've got children, those children are worried about whether their lives are going to be taken from them within the blink of an eye, all the friends that they might have made at school, all of the exams that they might have passed, and the life that they've dreamed for themselves. So the system does need to be properly resourced, and we do need to have safe routes for people to apply to from wherever it is they're trying to apply from abroad. And that just isn't the case at the moment. But instead of that debate, we've seen the stoking of division. And this ties into the budget and the economic picture because we've seen this stoking of division at a time of deep economic turmoil. So in the past 12 years, we've suffered a crisis in living standards. We've seen wages fall, public services have been destroyed. And I worry that sometimes the debate is certain people are trying to push it towards trying to blame refugees and asylum seekers for the failures that they're seeing in their local public services and their own falling living standards. But it wasn't refugees who sold off council houses and refused to provide enough funding to build new ones to replace them. It wasn't refugees who starved our public services and our NHS of funding and brought them to the point of collapse. And it wasn't refugees who proposed dramatically cutting taxes for the wealthiest in society, whilst the most vulnerable were suffering, and caused economic turmoil as a result. If you remember the Liz Truss mini budget, all of that was the government. And that's why the language on this needs to change. And I think it's important for all of us in the Labour movement to play our part in that, so that everybody understands who's responsible for the country's drop in living standards. It's all at the government's door. Now, on the public order bill, again, this is a very, very worrying piece of legislation. And again, the debate around it has been very misinformed and very toxic. And essentially, the bill will curtail the right for people to protest. But worse than that, for those people who are involved in a protest that the government says causes serious disruption, they could be imposed with a protest banning order. And then if they go to another protest after that, they could end up in prison. Now, the whole debate around this centres around what the definition of serious disruption is, because the government didn't provide one when it first set out the bill. And over the last few weeks, there's been a discussion in the Lords about how this really needs to be pinned down. So the Lords came back with quite a reasonable amendment that basically said that serious disruption was something that caused significant harm to organisations or people or the life of the community, where it results in significant delay to the delivery of a time-sensitive product, or it results in prolonged disruption to the access of essential goods or services. Now, what the government did, because that came back to the House of Commons for us all to vote on, they tried to scupper that by bringing forward their own amendment, and they defined serious disruption as more than a minor hindrance. Now, that should frighten us all, because more than a minor hindrance isn't serious disruption by any stretch of the imagination. More than a minor hindrance can mean anything. It can mean a group of people protesting outside a building, for example, and you having to cross onto the other side of the road because you can't walk up that pavement. It's annoying, but it's not worth somebody being put in prison for. And that's the chilling effect that this bill will have on our right to protest at a time when the government is, well, you know, it's really got some dire policies, let's put it like that. And then the other worrying thing about the public order bill is the right that it enshrines in law for the police to stop and search without suspicion. Even the police don't want that. They want it to be clear about how and why they have to stop people. And it usually comes with reasonable suspicion that you think somebody might have something on them that's going to be used to commit a crime. Stopping and searching without suspicion is very dangerous, and it will disproportionately impact largely BAME communities, as we've seen it's impacted them in the past. So it's a really worrying piece of legislation. So we're getting to a point now where we're in economic turmoil. We've seen the toxic debate emerging around the illegal migration bill, but then if we're angry about that, we won't be able to protest about it because we'll all risk being thrown into prison under protest banning orders. And that's a very authoritarian, dystopian place to be.
And just a final question, because I was saying this on one of the other interviews when we were talking about the economic situation and the government policy. Obviously, it's all quite depressing in a sense and can get us all down. What do you think out there in society at the moment can offer us on the left hope going forward?
Well, we've got so many good ideas. So in terms of the things that we should have seen in the budget, so we should have seen increasing the living wage to at least £15 an hour. That's supported by the trade union movement. We should have seen a major improvement in benefits for the poorest in society. What the Chancellor actually mentioned in the budget was the imposition of more vigorous benefit sanctions. And that should frighten us because we know how dangerous benefit sanctions are. And in fact, some people have lost their lives as a result of not having enough money to be able to feed themselves or get the medicines that they need to get. The other thing that we need to be campaigning for is a wealth tax so that we can properly fund our public services. And then in terms of the future, I see no blueprint from the future from the government. They don't have any ideas. So that's why it's up to us to fill the vacuum. And that means rolling out a green industrial revolution, a Green New Deal, if you like, to see huge investment in renewables and the jobs of the future. It also means reforming our economy so that it works for people. And that means stopping the bandit capitalism that we've seen over the last 13 years, where some people and organisations are allowed to make super profits, whereas other people don't even have a wage so that they can live on. Now, it doesn't matter what party you vote for, people are angry about that. So we need to be there to offer the solutions, and we already have those solutions. And we've been discussing them certainly for the last 5 or 6 years since, you know, I've been in Parliament. So we've got to coalesce around that radical and hopeful agenda, because I think people are quite depressed and disenchanted with politics at the moment, particularly the government. And they need somebody and something to come along and give them that vision of hope again, that everything is going to be better, that our children's lives are going to be better than ours, because at the moment people don't feel like they will be.
Thank you very much, Becky, for joining us. If you've enjoyed this video today, please do think about becoming a patron of Labour Outlook and giving us your regular support. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.